Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us. I'm Miellyn Fitzwater Barrows. This is the voice acting in horror games panel, and I wanted to give everybody an opportunity to introduce themselves.
What's up, everybody? I'm Cissy Jones. I'm a voice actor based in Los Angeles. I got my very first job ever as a voice actor was Katya in Telltale's The Walking Dead, which I think falls under horror. I went on to
Yeah.
do a bunch of roles in that franchise and a bunch of video games. I'm currently working right now in Disney's The Owl House, which is technically a kids show, but it's comedy horror. So, do with that what you will. I'm super excited to be here. Thank you, Gehenna Gaming, and all the panelists and stuff for being here. It's nice to see you guys.
Is it me? I'm Christopher Gray. I am not a voice actor. I asked if I should actually be on this panel, but I wanted to talk to you
Yes, you
about
should.
not being a voice actor, actually, as it relates to gaming, because I'm a tabletop game developer. And that means that I run a lot of tabletop role-playing games. And in today's world, that is becoming the new entertainment. And we all have Matt Mercer to look up to and judge ourselves by. So I'm here to talk about how you can do it without being Matt Mercer. But yeah, I have 2 games on the market. I have more coming. I'm very heavily involved in the role-playing game community. I'm very thrilled to be here, and thanks for putting this con together. This is really exciting. I am thrilled about all the money that has been raised, and I get to meet all of you nice new people.
Okay. And we have a Josh and a Joshua. Let's go with Josh next.
Hi, I'm Josh Heath. I am an aspiring voice actor-y person, but I have done just mostly advertisements for other game companies and things like that as part of my work at High Level Games, voiceovers for Kickstarters and things like that. And I've been running games for about 25 years and using silly voices and funny voices as well as serious voices to help tell the story effectively. So I'm coming at things from several different angles for this wonderful panel.
Very good. And Joshua?
Hey, I'm Joshua Doetsch. I'm a writer for tabletop games and video games. In the course of that work, I've directed voice actors for that text. I've done a tiny bit of voice acting, so kind of in between the two poles, and very happy to be here.
Oh, very good. And I realized I didn't tell you anything about myself. I'm a writer and producer. I've worked in video games and television, and and also print. And I've done some strange horror, romance, comedy, vampire games that are, whatever you do. So that's part of why I'm here. But we are going to talk about kind of the idea that you don't have to be a voice actor to be great at playing games, but also to get some tips from our resident voice actor to see what you could do to get really great at it. I think my first question is I wanted to see from all of you, when was the first time you realized what your voice could do and what kind of a picture your voice could paint when playing games?
Big question.
Everybody jumps in all at once.
You could break it down. Just think of a moment like when you were a kid. Did you ever have a moment when you were a kid where you thought, wow, my voice can, paint a picture in somebody's head?
When I was in elementary school, I would always try to do presidential impressions.
Oh, that's amazing.
But I didn't actually do what the presidents did. I did my own version of what I thought maybe they should do. At the time, George Senior was vice president, and so I made him a stutterer. And my friends would always try to explain to me that he doesn't do that, and I said, "Yeah, but it's funny." And I think I just sort of invented my own characters. But I think it was as early as elementary school where I realized making fun of voices made me popular or unpopular, depending on the class I was in.
Yeah, I always had a knack for accents and kind of sound-alike type stuff. I guess impressions, but I never knew you could make money doing it. And then when I kind of stumbled into voiceover, I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. This is great. And part of the thing with Katya in particular was that she was Belgian, but she'd been living in the States since she was 14. So they just wanted a teeny tiny little bit of an accent. So I was pretty much like, I went full accent, and then I was like, just dial it back as much as you need. Like, just take that dial and turn it. And then as soon as I get to where you want, that's where we stay. And all of those years of listening to different dialects and accents and, and mimicking people and not getting punched in the face came in very handy.
Well, tell me, so how do you dial it back? Like, so you have your full accent. How do you get rid of the edges there?
It just, every dialect has harsher components to it, the more to the native tongue that you go, right? Like with the French, it's the, and German is the very like sharp, consonants and things like that. It's just kind of just muddying those a little bit and bringing it back until you just hear it on a couple of vowels and a couple of consonants and maybe a word here and there instead of the entire sentence.
That makes
Joshua?
sense.
Well, as far as like the time I can remember where it was like, oh, voice could do this was probably grade school at a local forest preserve, which was like a bog. They had a Halloween event where they hired a professional storyteller to come in and tell ghost stories out in this spooky place. And just seeing that person hold an audience just wrapped with attention, even just little tricks like talking quietly and then loudly to get a jump scare in. I was like, I want to do that somehow.
Yeah. For me, it was 5th grade, and my voice dropped when I was very young, and people were like, "Oh, wow, you're this 11-year-old or so, and why do you have such a deep voice?"
I do have an anecdote of what voices shouldn't do.
Oh, please.
And I was early in college, I was in a haunted house maze as an actor. And I decided to play my jester at the top of my lungs, having beheaded a king and, jumping around and screaming maniacally. And I did that for many hours.
Ooh.
And I
Oh,
forgot about
man.
things like diaphragm and drinking water. And I will never do that again.
Yeah, that's a big thing, man. Vocal health. That's especially in a horror genre where they want screams and grunts and groans and cries. You really got to watch out. Actually, speaking of Matt Mercer and the Critical Role crew, Liam O'Brien was my director in one of my first sessions here in LA. And there's a thing we have to do in games, particularly called efforts, which is like when you get punched, it's, or when you throw a punch, And Liam said, efforts are the perfect combination of poop and sex. So now, anytime you kill somebody in a video game, think of poop and sex.
Thank you, Liam.
I don't know what to say to that. It's definitely vivid. So this brings me to something somebody said a minute ago about holding an audience and figuring out how to like tell a story in a way that you really get people's attention. And I took a public speaking course that was talking about that, taking your moment and clearing your mind and using your voice in this way that you can really kind of bring people together. And it's not just about, accents and acting. It can also be about volume and about pauses and a dramatic effect. Can you talk a little more about that and about what you do to kind of draw in an audience when you're leading, particularly like leading a tabletop game?
I think cadence is important, especially with tabletop games. With all the streaming happening now, there's a sort of expectation that the game master or the facilitator needs to act as the NPCs, and I've found that that usually defaults to accents, and doing funny voices. But really, cadence is one of the things that I lean on a lot, because if I want something to sound urgent, then I'm going to talk faster. If I want something to sound poignant, I'll slow down. And that kind of captures attention more than doing the most amazing accent. And I think just changing the speed of your voice goes miles.
Yeah. I'm not a tabletop DM, but or GM, but I do get asked a lot. I get a lot of messages from people saying I do good impressions. Can you introduce me to your agent? And to that end, I will say, like, listen, being able to do sound-alikes and accents and things like that is important, but the acting, inhabiting the soul of the character that you're being, whether it's, you know, somebody who is important, who wants you to lean on every word they're saying, is going to speak more slowly and probably more quiet, just to draw you in.
You have to
So I
listen.
could not agree more with you. You know, it's so important. Accents are fun, but an accent alone does not a character make.
Well, and we got a comment in the chat from Canadian Kaz who says that they suck at accents, but feel that pressure when they run games to do something cool. And I will say, like, it brings me out of it. If you can't do the accent, don't do it. That it's more about capturing the feeling than it is about sounding a certain way.
I would say a great example of that, honestly, is Griffin McElroy. I mean, he does some accents a little bit, in season 1 of The Adventure Zone, but more often it's just changing his attitude. And that's more important in my eyes.
Yeah, you've got to live the emotion. Whatever emotion you're trying to evoke in your players, you have to live it as the character that's speaking to them. And if you can live that emotion, then they will feel it, because that's gonna come through much stronger, much more effectively, as you're all saying, than just putting on an Irish or a Scottish accent and being like, I'm a dwarf. Much more interesting to be a dwarf with a purpose and specific emotions that you're trying to evoke.
Yeah, I mean, it is the same in a session in a video game. If you hear somebody doing an accent, but they're only thinking about the accent, they're not acting. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how good their accent is. If you can't still act through the accent and not think about the accent, it doesn't matter.
And acting can just not even be about, taking on a persona as much as like just physically embodying. Like if you slouch, you're going to have a different kind of tone than if you're upright. And if I'm a soldier, I would actually present myself like this. I'm not acting like a soldier, but I'm changing my posture so that my voice and my demeanor does. But if I'm some guy at the bar, I might be more like this. And actually changing your sitting posture goes miles as well.
Well, that changes the way your breath goes. And I'm so sorry, Joshua, please.
Oh, that's okay. No, I was just going to say, with you can get nervous as a DM or GM, like how you're going to embody these things. But a big advantage you have is the people sitting around you aren't just your audience; they're your co-storytellers. They want you to succeed.
Yeah.
They're putting their imagination into it. So if you give them just even a slight prompt to go on, like slouching, or if you're staring really intently and being very still, as opposed to a character that's just maybe constantly moving around or nervous, they will, if you give them just one thing to latch on, they will fill in the rest. Even if that's narrated, you could just say, and the voice sounded like, and that's perfectly fine. That almost novelized describing how things are. But yeah, if you give them those little points to hang on, they'll fill in the details.
Yeah,
I love that.
There's a lot more physicality. Sorry, I just want to emphasize that. Like the voices you do are not just how you're speaking, but the physicality of what it is you're bringing to the table. Being excited.
I just fell in love with you.
So absolutely agreeing with what everyone's saying about that, and being like, when you can embody the physicality of the voice you want to present, then you're heading in the right direction.
And that'll change your voice in ways you don't even plan on, like just those little changes.
I mean, even look at us sitting here, like, let's say you were going to say the same thing you just said. That'll change your voice in ways you didn't even imagine. That'll change your voice in ways you didn't even imagine, right? It just the little things that we do, you don't have to be Italian and be crazy with all the hands and everything, but just the little gestures that we make as humans, bring that. Why not?
I think in games too, facilitators can be caught off guard when you're entering a dialogue with the player character, and that the character, inevitably a player will say something that throws you off, and you might be already kind of embodying a character. And one of the things that I like to do is interrupt myself, and I'll, if somebody comes and throws me off and I don't really know where to go or what the character might be thinking, then I'll probably I actually change my posture and say, okay, so now he's thinking about it and he's going to consider what you're saying. And then I kind of go back into it because it kind of buys me some time. There's a lot of pressure to perform. You don't have to. You can kind of go back out into narrative leave the character for a moment, find your bearings and go back in. And you can do that just by changing how your body is sitting or standing. I like to stand, but kind of uneasy now. I'm going to stand.
You can also do that with accents too. You can say the character is speaking in a French accent without saying, or
Right.
even the character is speaking in another language. It gives you a lot of space for that too. That you are with tabletop, you're very much painting that picture. You don't have all the other cues that you might have with like a video game or different things like that. That you definitely have to kind of
You
hit
remain the
on.
storyteller.
Yeah.
You don't have to be each character as long as you're the storyteller, right?
Mhm.
Sorry, Maya, I totally just cut you off.
No,
I blame my
I'm just listening to
sweet
you.
drink.
There's
Been a long week.
there's lots of audiobooks that kind of cover both. There's
Yeah.
audio readers I like that will do very specific voices, but there's others that will just vary their voice slightly and
Mhm.
will say don't try and do the voice, and they're just fine. They have really good narrative voices. But yeah, and you can kind of pick and choose and play with what works best.
And some people overcorrect because they can do too many voices and it is distracting. That
Mhm.
it pulls you out of the story. It's like what Cissy was saying before. If you're not really thinking about what is being said, if you're not thinking about the story part, and you're worried so much about how it sounds, then that's not going to actually immerse anybody
Totally pulls
in
me out.
anything. Yeah.
Totally pulls me out.
Okay. So we've covered some of this, but I would like to specifically ask you all to think about like what kind of advice would you give to people who wanted to maybe be better at using their voices in games, out of games, in any sort of scenario.
Get used to hearing yourself talk. Sorry, Joshua, go ahead.
No, that's nearly the identical to the advice I was going to give, is that practice, talk to yourself, stand in front of the mirror and do a presentation. Like all those public speaking skills you got taught in school, if you got taught them, hopefully you got taught them, use them. Like go and talk to your cat and pretend your cat is your gaming group. Like the cat won't care, and you'll get practice doing whatever it is that you want to bring to your table. And it will work. It will make you better. And it's easy to do, and it's fun to do when you just let yourself dive into it.
Yeah, I'd like to
If you have-
punctuate that. When I started hearing myself on podcasts and I started recording my playtest sessions, there were a lot of things that bothered me about how my voice sounded. Nobody else noticed those things, but I did. And I was able to correct those things that bothered me. So when I heard myself again, it wouldn't bother me anymore. And the more that you listen to yourself, the better off you are. I think that's really great advice.
And a point about that, don't ever talk about how, like, if you hear something that bothers you about your voice, don't tell other people, because then that's all they'll hear, right? If you're like, oh, I've got this weird nasal click thing that happens, they hadn't heard it until you said it. And now that's all they hear.
Well, absolutely. Don't ever admit to your to what you think your faults are, because you're right. People probably won't notice them. Also, Super Rat Lord said your cat will definitely judge you. So there are different opinions. It's you
true.
know, some
The
cats
cat
are
will judge you
judgmental.
no matter. Yeah. What you think.
Yeah. Who gives a shit
Yeah.
what cats think anyway?
Yeah.
I mean, come on. They're
True.
a thing. But Christopher, you made me think of something too about the fact that you can record yourself too.
Yeah.
And
I made a practice of recording sessions, because not only do you get to hear yourself, you also hear how you're facilitating the game. And most importantly, you're hearing how people are responding to how you're facilitating the game. And so it actually makes you a better facilitator if you're listening to your games. It's hard, but it's
Absolutely.
worth it.
It is. It's awkward to think about, when I first started doing public speaking and hosting panels, because that's one of the things I've done for a long time is host panels and going on podcasts. The first time I ever was a guest on a podcast, it was right after the first game that I wrote came out. I was so nervous and just sure that I had messed up, and was sure that I had said something stupid, and was sure that the people were not nearly as nice as they seemed like they were. They were, by the way, nerd appropriate podcasts. Those guys rated NA are the best,
Yeah, they
the
are.
sweetest people. Actually, one of the hosts of that podcast is hosting a panel tonight at 10 about voice acting, about horror video games. But the thing about it was, so I started out and I wasn't the best the first time I went on a show, but it didn't matter. And the more times I did it, and the more times I got used to hearing myself talk, and the more times that I was just there and was able to react to the moment, which is, running a panel is a lot like running a game. You have to be able to react in the moment, and you have to be able to listen to people, and running interviews and those kinds of things. And that's the other thing, is listening. That it's as important, the way you're talking, as it is listening to what people are saying, because that will really give you so much more to work with. And you could have players who also are really getting into playing out their characters and really getting into, acting with you. And if you are in tune with each other, you can pull things out of each other that you wouldn't have really had if you weren't paying attention.
I would also say practice reading out loud and tell the story of the book out loud. Listen, my kids get an earful every night, whether they like it or not. But they used to say, "Mom, don't do the voices." And now they're like, "Why aren't you doing the voices?" Right? So like practice. Read out loud. Even if you don't have kids, even if you don't have a cat, practice reading out loud and do it for a long time. Because if you're running a game, if you're running a session, it's not short. It's not a short amount of time, and your voice needs the practice of staying hearty. Drink a lot of water. If you start feeling that, get a green apple. You're good to go.
Yeah, read to adults too. If you have adult audiences, you can. Adults don't get read to enough.
That's true.
Now I want you to read me a book, Joshua. Will you read
Well, I've with other literary types, I've had story reading dates or friend gatherings, or and I used
great.
to back when I was a student, I would go to a lot of open mics to read my fiction to people, which was a great way to edit my fiction, but also just to get used to, again, that repetition of just hearing your voice, seeing what you can do with it. Getting used to slowing down because you want to speed through stuff. Sometimes a tip for that is if you have a character who just talks in a slow and deliberate manner, it forces, if you're doing that in character, it forces you to maybe slow down in a way that you would normally speed through because you're nervous.
Yeah, it's amazing. People don't realize how fast they normally read.
Yes.
So even, in voice acting for video games and other copy, a lot of times somebody will read a scratch. So they'll have like an engineer or something read the line that's like, "Welcome to the online virtual gaming horror, blah, 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 blah." And they'll read it through like this, and it's totally flat and there's nothing happening to it. And it's done in 10 seconds and you need to fit it in 10 seconds, but it has to have personality to it. And I'm like, that's
okay.
But again, like the practice of reading out loud and listening back, recording yourself, listening back and being like, wow, I'm really fast.
Yeah, you'll want to read fast because you'll feel like you're taking up, time, and like you'll lose attention if you don't read fast. That'll be the nervous feeling. But if you read slower and more deliberately, you're engaging the audience better. If they're just hearing you going fast, it almost feels like, oh, this is a thing that should be rushed through. Or
well, it's taking up space. It's if you're rushing through it, it does make it seem like it's not that important, and that people do want to hear. They do, and they want to understand when you're talking too. I tend to talk quickly too, particularly when I have a lot of ideas and I can't quite get them all out. And so being prepared, I think, is another thing that makes a lot of sense. It's like you have to be super, super prepared while also ready to take things as they come.
Improv.
Yes, Josh.
And
there was an idea that you pulled out there that I think is helpful too, is that listen for the silences. That talking at a certain speed is really important, but also being comfortable stopping and just letting the silence sit there for a moment. It builds so much character around whatever else you're trying to say. And that is hard for people, particularly when you're nervous, to just live in the silence and let the silence exist. But people naturally do, and it builds tension in good and bad ways. But in a horror game, when you're trying to build tension, you want those silences to exist so that tension gets felt.
Yeah, when you start luxuriating in that silence and like using it, and you're like, oh, I got this power. Everyone has to pause now. Like if you find when you first start reading to people, you'll get really nervous when you get to a page turn because you're like, oh crap, I'm pausing. But when you get to a point where you're just like, you can look out at the audience and be like, take your time, then you're getting to a good spot.
Try to do that face that Joshua just did. I really like it. And also, did you notice when Josh was talking about doing the pausing, he was pausing in a really good way. Sometimes you can pause just to give yourself an opportunity to think. And it's better. It'll help you keep from saying things like and stumbling around. But it can seem dramatic, even though maybe you really just don't know what to say next.
Yeah, don't be afraid of periods. We talk about that in the communications industry. Don't be afraid of periods.
Somebody suggests a book, School. Sorry, SE School. I don't know how to read anybody's username, so forgive me, but suggests the book Speak Like Churchill, Stand Like Lincoln. And that apparently has some good strategies.
Ooh.
I know. I'm going to write it down.
Yep.
Does anybody else have any resources they want to recommend?
Ooh. Well, this is sort of adjacent to your question. I think one thing that you can do is characters that you see in movies that you like, keep them in your mind when you're thinking about a particular character. So you might
that's
not
good.
be imitating them or emulating them, but I do write on an index card NPC name Clint Eastwood. And so, okay, I got the idea. I think I know.
That's great.
And
really
you know, you
smart.
don't just having the picture in your mind helps a lot.
That can help a lot. And also, if you another trick is if there's a imitation impersonation that you've tried and failed at, but it's consistent, that's a unique character you can use anywhere.
Yep.
If there's an accent you can't quite get, but it sounds consistent and strange, there's your fantasy accent for some.
Yeah, you don't have to be Clint. You can just squint your eyes a little more than normal and look.
Use a lot of
before you talk.
air.
Yeah,
That's
there.
right. You whisper and
Pauses.
growl a little bit. Yeah, I love that idea of coming prepared with a whole bunch of different actors or characters, because you could have a whole game full of people, and they could all be different, and they wouldn't even necessarily know that you're using those as reference.
But if you think about it, everything is research, right? Like watching people on the street. Well, not right now, but any television show that you watch, right? Like you best believe Joe Exotic is a new character. You best believe Carol Baskin is going to come up in Specs.
And everybody did their Joe Exotic. That was one of my favorite things about the whole series, is that literally everybody has a Joe impression on the show. And you're right. Like you could absolutely.
It's this real high-pitched nasal thing with a little bit of country twang added to it.
That is going to, mark my words, in a year, every clown character is going to be that in video games.
Yeah.
Sorry, I've just given it all away.
No, now I'm just thinking about Joe Exotic. Like, just there's so much to that.
Free the tiger.
He's a complicated, very complicated figure.
There's not much complication there.
I have a lot of, well, there's a lot of bad. I don't know. I have a lot of thoughts, and that's why I'm like, okay. So, I know we've been getting some
research. Everything is research.
Everything is research. I know we've been getting some questions in the feed, but I wanted to actually specifically call out to see if anybody has any questions for the panel. I'm keeping an eye over here. While we wait, we can definitely keep talking about things. So Christopher, you mentioned something about keeping like a list of actors. How else do you all create characters? What do you use for reference for characters, and how do you kind of like draw a picture of someone?
If it's going to be a significant character, I always think about motivation. I know it's cliche, but I always think about, what does this NPC want? And that helps me answer any question that's going to hit. If I don't know what the NPC wants, if I don't know that this goblin wants out of the dungeon, then the goblin's just going to fight. But if I know the goblin wants out of the dungeon, it's going to be a completely different encounter. So if I want the goblin to be even more interesting, I might just assign a trait. There's this really great site, I think it's called like 1,000 NPC traits or something like that. And I really will go to an online die roller and roll a D1000 and just pick a random trait. It'll be grumpy. Okay, so this is a grumpy goblin that wants to leave the dungeon. Got it. And
that's great.
I don't have to have a voice. I have an intent, and that kind of creates the character. You have to shorthand because we have a lot of these goblins,
So usually when I'm creating a persistent character, which I think is a little bit different than just a, hey, here's a quick character, I try to think of a catchphrase or a word that they're going to use regularly, or something that they'll use specifically as a filler word. So I had a character for years who was a half-orc Grondak who ended up becoming a wonder chef. There's a long story there.
I'm already fascinated.
It was an amazing character, but his catchphrase was, okay. And so I would always lean back, like if he had no idea what to say, he would just say, okay. And built that into the character so often that people would be like, oh, he's thinking because he's saying, okay. Like, now we'll wait and see exactly what he's going to come out with. And then it would be some sort of ridiculous thing that he would present to the group.
You know, that makes me think of confession. I've been playing a whole lot of Animal Crossing. Like a whole lot. I know. And Tom Nook, he is a little like goblin, gremlin, troll or something for sure. Like there's something bad going on and I don't know what's happening. Pretty sure he's in the bunny suit. But he always says, yes, mm-hmm. Every time. And I think that definitely applies to voice and to writing. And that's a way to think about if you're writing characters as well. So we did get a question. A couple of questions. Thank you all for sending in questions. Canadian Kaz says, what was your favorite character to perform and why? Or least favorite, the character you hated?
I definitely have my favorite. I used him a lot. Everybody called him the sad cleric. And he actually had a different name, but he had a tavern that had a different name, but everybody called the tavern the sad cleric because he would spend the entire time at his own bar, not caring about anything else except reminiscing on all of the horrible things that he had to go through his entire life. So he would spend the entire time, if you'd come up to him to order a drink, he would say, well, yes, it is time for frivolity because of all of the days that have passed and all of the souls that have died for useless wars, the centuries upon centuries. Because I figure, if you're an elf and you've lived long enough, you have a lot of baggage. And I just love that character so much. I put him in a novel. I liked him so much.
I love that. And I love the idea of like mixing the emotions, making the, what he's talking about different from what he is, from how he feels. I'm sorry, I'm a little just distracted because Nick from Gehenna Gaming wants to know if Easter has totally destroyed your town's ecosystem in Animal Crossing. And yes, it has. Yes, it very much has. I'm so sick of the eggs. I don't want to ever see another egg. At first, I thought it was really pretty. I liked like the cherry trees, the blossoms. I thought it was special because I had cherry trees. No, all the trees are blooming fine. But seriously, if this doesn't wind up with like a whole bunch of dead bunnies and blood everywhere, I'm going to be writing some angry letters. Okay. We have another question. How do you remember how all of your recurring NPCs sound? That's from Narfi Ref.
Now, for me, it's that index card with the note of Clint Eastwood on it. I like to be as stripped down as possible. You have a lot to consider and think about when you're running a game, and so if you can fit it on an index card, there's a really great book called Return of the Lazy Dungeon Master by Mike Shea, which is actually a sequel to his first book. But he really just lays it out and how you can get rid of the minutia of running games simply by using a process and fitting everything onto an index card.
Mine is, oh, cool. You like that? Cool. Do you have video, audio reference? Can we listen to what I did last time?
Yeah, I tend to do the voices in my head before I have the character speak. So if someone is a dwarf, for example, that I've used before, I will try and remember what it was, the conversation that they had last time, and I'll hear it in my head. And then I will do my best to kind of do like a recording, record and roll moment where I'm like, okay, and now he's picking up what he said before and coming out with something similar. Doesn't always work, but that's the sort of goal that I have with it.
Yeah, I do a shorthand, kind of like what was mentioned, writing down like a a mannerism or a personality trait or a phrase or word that gets me into the voice. And the great thing when I'm playing online is I can mute myself and say the phrase before I start talking to the character.
Nice.
Then I'm ready to go.
I like that. That makes me think of my mother-in-law cannot remember how to say guacamole. She just can't. She just can't. And so she has to say holy moly first. And so like if she goes to the store, she's like, can you tell me where the holy moly guacamole is? So she does the live muting. Yeah.
Guess what? That's in your character. Go on.
I know. Oh, she's great. She's so great. And she's got this like great Boston accent. And she helped raise my nieces. But my nieces were from like a very rural town in North Carolina. So you can imagine the combination of accents that they had when they were young was like full on like hee-haw mixed with Boston. It was
I love that.
Now I need to hear audio. I
know.
That needs to be my newest character.
All the Boston is gone now. It's just hee-haw. They're teenagers now. We got a note in the chat that the next raffle ends in 10 minutes. So if you have an opportunity to donate, please do. Or also just get the word out. They're raising money to help, research and destroy this plague that has befallen all of us.
And thank you to everybody who's donated so far. Thank you for
Yes.
being here and thank you for taking part. Thank you for donating.
Yeah.
It means a lot.
It does. So does anybody else have any questions?
You had asked earlier
chat?
what everybody's favorite characters and least
Oh,
favorite
yeah.
characters would be. Josh and Joshua, I'm curious what yours are.
I'll let you take this first, Joshua, while I try and think of some.
Oh, geez. I've got in my Ravenloft game, I have often I'll have to just figure out voices kind of on the fly because players will take an unused path. And in my Ravenloft game, there's a shop in the Barovian village, and there's this very huge but simple-minded, sweet guy that is working the shop for his kind of Ebenezer-like uncle. And the players, through some wealth they had gained and through some really good role play and a really good charisma test, essentially rented this large, simple man away. A really powerful character, actually, to have working for them. And I couldn't think of a good reason not to they by everything that was going on in that story, they acquired him. So I had this very sweet, soft-spoken guy that has become very endearing to them. And in a horror setting, that just means I can really twist their heartstrings later. But he's been a lot of fun to play. I've enjoyed playing hags a lot.
Love hags. They're my favorite.
Hags are great because they want things other than just outright destroying the characters. Like it's like they taunt and they're lovely. They like to invert good things, and you can just throw in all kinds of weird mannerisms like strange rhymes and cackling. I like to cackle.
A good cackle or a mwahaha.
Yeah, it's
helps.
very cathartic. In this time of stress, everyone should go out and climb on your roofs and cackle or don't. I don't know.
Don't worry if the police gets called. It's fine.
Yeah,
It's fine.
It's fine.
They're busy right now.
True.
So what about you, Josh?
It's tough. It's tough because I love all my characters and I love all the voices I do for them. So I think on some level it's a toss-up between, for me, goblins, who I always love to have be like little happy guys that are just so excited about things, and villains who are so excited about things. And I love steepling my hands when I'm doing a Monty Burns style villains, and I think that just makes it so exciting. For me, the voices I like doing the least are the ones that actually require me to do a consistent accent. If I have to play a Slavic character they tend to come up for whatever reason in vampire games quite frequently, it's fine, and I can do one for just long enough in chunks. But if the players want that character for a long time, eventually I'm just like, okay, they are continuing the accent and I am not.
Do you want the trick to Russian?
Please.
I had a Russian friend. When I was first getting into voiceover, I would watch her mouth every time she'd move. And I said, tell me everything. And she was like, you want trick to Russian? And I said, yes. And she said, add sneer, remove joy.
That's good advice.
There you go.
That's very good.
Barovia makes me think of that because that's that classic vampire story, gothic horror, and I really, really enjoyed Barovia too. And one of the things that I did for Strahd, who is Dracula, for those of you who are unacquainted, was talk as softly and as slowly as possible because it made the table everybody had to lean in, you know.
Yeah.
And then I would do something abrupt, like for example with Strahd, I would like take out the Strahd dice, which were really heavy metal dice, and just like dunk, dunk, dunk on the table. And they're like, oh no. You know, so I'm not even in character yet, but they know the character's coming, you know, building anticipation. And then we're going to go nice and easy because Strahd can take his time. Strahd's like Polly and Goodfellas. He doesn't move for anyone.
No, you go to Strahd. Strahd doesn't go to you.
Yeah, right.
That's awesome.
That is great. So Cissy, I don't think that you told us who your favorite character to play is.
You know, I'm gonna take the easy way out here. I did a game a couple years ago called Firewatch, and that one I did a character called Delilah, and she was just a little bit insane and a little bit quirky, and she liked her crossroads and her tequila, and she was close enough to me but far enough away from me that it was like putting on an old glove anytime I stepped into the booth, and I just loved her.
She's great too because there's a lot of mystery around her, so you don't really know.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean it's not a horror game, but it has some elements to it that definitely kind of, you know, make you nervous, and you don't. And that's an interesting thing about characters like these too, is that if you don't know what they want, if the players don't know what they want, if the players don't fully understand where they're coming from or what their true agenda is, you know, that can really kind of make it feel scary. Editor Jenga says that they loved Firewatch.
Thank you. I did too.
And so we are, oh yes, and we've gotten a few more questions. Unfortunately, we are out of time.
No.
So I would like for everybody, we have 3 minutes left. I say 3 minutes that you all can tell us all your names again, tell us where we can find you. And so Cissy, do you want to start?
Sure. I'm Cissy Jones. You can find me on the Twitters or Instagram at CISSY Speaks, Cissy Speaks. And if you have any questions, shoot them my way. Anyone else? Anyone?
I'm Christopher Gray with the E spelling. And you can find my stuff at christopher.world. Happiest Apocalypse on Earth is my game. Cthulhu Disneyland. I also have Great American Witch coming out soon, so check that out when it comes.
Awesome.
You can find me at Joshua Doetsch on Twitter. Doetsch is spelled very oddly, so I'm just going to put it in the chat right now. Also, joshuadoetsch.com, and I have a Patreon as well, where I read stories.
Oh,
There you
I
go.
love it. Josh?
So you can find me most commonly on Werewolf the Podcast, where I talk about the game Werewolf the Apocalypse. You can also find me at High Level Games, which is www.highlevelgames.ca. Yes, it's a Canadian company. I'm sorry. You can also find us on Twitter at HLG_corporate. And yeah, lots of other places, but those are the main ones. So come by and visit.
Very good. And I'm Miellyn Fitzwater Barrows. You can find me on Twitter at Miellyn B. That's MIELLYNB. Yes, someone took at Miellyn and she doesn't tweet very much, and I'm angry with her, but we're trying to get past it. It's
Someone
fine.
has at Cissy Jones too. She was a total believer back in the day. And I was like, you can't have Justin Bieber associated with me. What?
I mean, yeah, no. I made a few games, but one noteworthy one was called Strange Love's Vampire Boyfriends. It's a supernatural romance comedy horror game that is no longer available as a game, but they actually made it into a book. You can find it on Amazon. Yeah, and I also just wanted to remind everybody, you know, if you can, please make a donation. This is really important. We need to help the World Health Organization as much as possible, and we also need to help, you know, Gehenna Gaming for doing this. I think this is really fantastic. They were like the first ones when everything happened. They were the first ones that I saw who hit that pivot and were figuring out, like, how can we bring people together? How can we still get together and keep talking and foster our community. And I think that's really, really special and important. If you can't donate, get the word out, please. Just do as much as you can to signal boost. And we are at time. Thank you all
Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Stay safe. Thank you.
Stay healthy, everyone.
I'm assuming he's going to